Welcome to the podcast series on technology and innovation in coaching, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading independent body. I am Claudia Day, coach and entrepreneur and founder of eHuddle. In this AC podcast series, we are privileged to talk to coaches, academics, and entrepreneurs who will be sharing with us some of their research, findings, and experiences related to technologies that could help us democratize coaching, elevate the coaching practice, lower cost, or save time, among other benefits. This is a very broad topic, going from how technologies can support a coach or carry out a coaching process. We hope this series brings technology closer to coaches. Enjoy listening. Welcome to Professor Peter Hawkins, a leading author, researcher, trainer in systemic team coaching and co-founder of the Global Team Coaching Institute. Also with us, Tom Marsden, Chief Executive Officer at Saberr, a people development platform for managers and teams. I'll let you introduce yourselves and tell us more about you.
So delightful to be with you, Claudia, and to share this platform with Tom. Tom and I have been working together, about nearly 4 years now, looking at how we can best use a digital platform to enable team coaching. And as you said, Claudia, because I train systemic team coaches both face-to-face and digitally right around the world, with over 2,000 people having done trainings with us through the Global Team Coaching Institute, and many more through the work we do with AOEC, the Academy of Executive Coaching, and Renewal Associates, training face-to-face people all around the world. This whole issue is one that Tom and I have been exploring together with others for quite some time.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so I came into this from a slightly different route. So I spent about 10 years funding leverage buyouts in Europe, and then worked in consultancy, originally at McKinsey, and then with an HR services group for about 15 years, where I was looking a lot at sort of organizational change programs and how to drive organizational change. And for the last 5 or so years, working with Peter, we've been developing software, which has that same ambition, really, to look at organization-wide change and how technology and coaching can make that happen more effectively.
Perfect. Thank you again for being with us today. So to get us started, I guess it would be helpful to get a bit of the context as to how technology is impacting teams.
This is something I think that has really accelerated, spurred by the coronavirus pandemic, where suddenly many organizations that I've been working with as client organizations have suddenly, their whole bit where they've been talking about how we're going to have virtual hybrid working suddenly happened within weeks. So we've seen this big move to hybrid teams as well as virtual teams, where you've got some people in the office, some people not, many people working from home. And I think this has not only meant that teams have had to become digitally literate and look at how do we do teaming, but change their whole way of teaming. So many teams that we work with and coach, where they used to have, a long team meeting once a week, decided, well, you can't do that on Zoom. You just can't keep the same level of engagement. So they've done more frequent meetings. They've started to realize that some of the things that happen around teams, where you would have chats in the coffee room or around the water cooler, no longer happen. So you've got to build in a personal and social connection into your team meeting. And then how do you use some of the things, some of the tools like Mural or Miro or whiteboards? How do you use the chat box? Do you end up with one conversation on the screen and another going on in chat box? All these quite changed ways of working. So digitalization is not just digitally doing what happened before, but is changing how we team and how we meet, as is things like how we keep up with each other through the week through Teams or WhatsApp or messaging. So that's one of the big changes that the last 2 or 3 years has brought about since we started talking, Tom.
Indeed, and I'd completely agree with that. And I think, but I think the starting point for this change happened even before that. And I think it's been driven by the fact that in many businesses today, work gets done in teams. It's not about individuals working alone. It's about team collaboration. There was one survey that says 85% of people said a significant part of their work involves high degrees of collaboration. And so technology needs to reflect that. And I think this is a trend we've been seeing for over a decade, that technology is moving to support team and enable teams to work better together. And I think some of the major examples are Slack, for example, which was one of the fastest growing software companies in the world for about 5 years. The fundamental premise of Slack was that email communication is a one-to-one mechanism, whereas Slack is more team-based. And then I think Microsoft reacted to that. And Microsoft Teams, which initiated before the pandemic, but was accelerated significantly through the pandemic, has one of the fastest growing, fastest adoption of a new technology product over the last 5 years. So I think the ability to change how technology supports collaborative teams has been an extremely strong theme in a lot of software and a lot of technology development. And I think that reflects, as I say, the way people are working. And I think another major trend we've seen in terms of how organizations are designed and functioning has been a shift towards more agile ways of working, and a lot of an agile approach is about empowering small teams to get things done. It's a fundamental premise of agile, is to kind of empower small teams on the ground to get things done. And so I think there's been, over the last 10, 15 years, a growing interest in how technology can support teaming. I think a lot of HR software and coaching software is catching up now.
And I'm glad you've kind of pointed us further back, Tom, because, as I've written about in my books on leadership team coaching and systemic team coaching, we've seen probably over the last 30 years this move from individual leadership to collective leadership. The realization that if the only point of integration in an organization is your CEO and everything else is functionalized and siloized, you cannot adapt and respond to the modern world. And so that the drive of complexity, the drive that your team members need to not just manage their part, but be responsible for the whole, what the team's doing, and be able to represent that to external stakeholders. That move has been one that's been increasing in speed, as Tom is saying, over the last 20 to 30 years. And so this is why I think we're seeing in coaching a big shift from realizing that if you want to develop organizations, it's no good just developing lots of individuals. You've also got to develop the connections between them. And now, the work Tom and I are doing together is not just about how do you develop teams, it's how do you develop the team of teams. How do you develop the connections between teams, not just the people within teams? And I think the movement from coaching individuals to coaching connections is a trend within coaching which we'll see continue and accelerate. And I think in some ways that is running counter to some digitalization of coaching, which is providing platforms to, if you like, body shop coaches, the Uberization of coaching, where you can go on and you can dial up a coach. And I think we see that trend on one hand, and then on the other hand, we're seeing a more organizational centric and systemic centric approach, which is using digitalization to enable better connectivity and the better development of the connections between individuals, between teams, between functions, between organizations.
Great. Would you want to expand a little bit more for the listeners, this concept of coaching how teams interact within each other in the bigger system? So more of this systemic centric approach.
Well, if I start on that, Tom, and then hand over to you on the digital enablement of that, you see, for many years, we talked about how do we create high performing teams. And coaches, first of all, were kind of brought in to do facilitation and then performance coaching. And then it was very much, take the team off site, do a session with them, And we realized a lot of what was developed on the offsite never got embedded. So then we had to look at how do you coach the team, not just in offsite workshops, but how do you coach them live in their real work? So we had all that development. And then we realized that many teams were saying, all right, how do we develop ourselves to be the best team in the organization, right? So their success was at the cost of the rest of the system. So then we start to realize, well, actually, we need to coach teams systemically, i.e., not in how they tick the boxes of being a high-performing team, but how do they deliver greater value to all their stakeholders, upstream, downstream, the people, the support departments that support them, the internal customers, the external customers, the investors, the communities where they operate, partner organizations, the ecology. So then what we realize is, of course, you cannot coach a team in isolation. And there's an economic driver to this, which is, you can't afford to bring as Tom says, we work with organizations that have several hundred teams inside them. They cannot afford to get a coach in for every team. And if they did, they'll all be coached in different directions. So what we're looking at is how do you get an integrated teaming culture and a team coaching culture? And how do you digitally enable that? And that's why it takes us on to looking at how do we use coaches along with the digital systems to train managers and leaders to coach their own teams, but supported by and supervised by trained systemic team coaches.
And I think one of the things we found in terms of sort of the role of technology within this, I think you start to really understand where technology can play a role and where it can't, and where we still need coaches. And there's no question we still need coaches, because what technology is very good at is developing kind of routines and habits. And actually, when we were looking at the research around how we enable better teaming, interestingly, we look quite a long way beyond traditional HR or coaching software to look at things like fitness apps or diet apps, because they're about getting people into regular routines and habits and making them stick. And so actually a lot of the inspiration for how we thought about this is to say, well, what are the routines and habits we want to be encouraging in teams? And in our research, we found that many, if not most teams aren't performing those routines and habits on a regular basis. And it's exactly the way you can nudge them into those routines. You can give them prompts, you can ask questions, you can, challenge them, you can kind of be very timely in terms of the way you're nudging them. But I think we're still very conscious of the fact that there is a certain type of question, once you've asked it, where you are moving way beyond the realms of where artificial intelligence is now, and you need human intelligence to be able to unpick the answers. And whether that's the human intelligence of the team or the intelligence of the coach supporting the team, it is about, in our view, technology and people working together. It is around how can we get the best of both. So we're quite conscious in terms of where we feel technology can play and where we need to be really cognizant of the fact that we need, human intelligence and consciousness is going to make the big difference for teams still.
And I love that, Tom. I think the notion that a lot of the base work that team coaches used to do, and some of the stuff about shifting some common behaviours, a lot of that the team coaching app can enable, a lot of the behavioural level. But then there are certain deeper patterns in some of the cultural assumptions, some of the mindsets, which are much harder to shift just through the technology. Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking, two of my grown-up children, their lives were transformed from couch to 5K in 5 weeks or whatever it is. And, there's a lot of that, just the team coaching app organising the connectivity between your one-to-one sessions from the team manager and their team meetings, and making sure the right things happen in the team meeting that need the team to all be involved, and the things that need to happen in the one-to-ones happen in the one-to-ones. How you build in regular team reviews and team learning. All of these you can habituate. The digital support can help you habituate into an ordinary pattern.
So, Peter, you started there with some of these habits and routines. Can you share with us more or give us more examples about these routines and habits that teams should have where the digital component comes in?
Do you want to say a bit more about those, Tom?
I can certainly say the ones we're focusing on within the technology, and then I'm sure Peter can fill in the gaps in terms of where humans need to get involved. But from a technology perspective, there's a number of questions we pose to teams. The first is one around kind of crafting the team culture, and for that we're talking about, why do we exist as a team in the first place? What are we here to do? And what are the behaviors we should expect from each other? So we can get some standardized norms of the kind of behaviors we're expecting from each other. So we have facilitated sessions that kind of provide the scaffolding for that kind of conversation. And this is where we've been working with Peter and coaches to say, what are the right questions to pose? How do we enable that conversation effectively in a digital platform? We then move on to other questions like, how do we make sure the team is optimizing the time spent in meetings? A lot of teams are spending too much time in meetings and it's not effective. So we have tools that enable teams to understand where they're spending their time, but also optimize the time and improve meeting effectiveness through various techniques and nudges. We have questions around team reflection. So how do we make sure teams are spending the right time to reflect on what's working, what's not working, what could be improved through things like retrospectives and health checks. We have a lot of support for development conversations, one-to-ones generally, but in particular the sort of developmental one-to-one a manager might have with a team member, where they are really tapping into their sort of broader aspirations for kind of growth and career, their career aspirations. And how do we support those kind of conversations? Feedback, another habit. How do we make it really easy to create a culture of feedback where people can give and receive feedback in the moment? And technology can play a big role to facilitate that. But the idea is not a sort of scary process of a sort of very formal feedback approach. It's something that is embedded in the culture. So those are some of the routines and habits that we're enabling through technology. And all of those, there are others as well in terms of sort of prompting teams to think about well-being and things that they could do to improve team well-being. But all of those, you can see that there are kind of coaching support that could sit alongside the technology to support all of those conversations as well.
One of the nice things that's kind of built into this is based on both research that Tom and his outfit have done, but research I've done over many years about effective teams. What we know is that the most critical first thing is the team must have a clear purpose, and that purpose must be understood by everyone in the team. And not only must be a clear purpose, everyone recognise we can only achieve through collaboration. The second then is, once we've done that, how do we not just have a purpose statement that sits on the wall, but how do we operationalise that into clear priorities, clear objectives, clear roles, clear processes, what we call the clarifying discipline. A lot of that, we can help teams at all levels do through the digital app. Then, as Tom said, so what are the behaviours we need that are going to support, going to achieve those objectives and those priorities and fulfil our purpose? Where I think that this then takes us is almost to a triaging system like they have in hospitals. Yeah, there are some things that actually just need a nurse to deal with. Yeah, or you can deal with by phone. There are some things that actually just getting phone advice won't do. You need to see someone one-to-one to get some support. There are some things you can do through peer support, so that we are helping the more expensive, really experienced systemic team coach work doing only what they need to be doing. Does that make sense? So I'll give an example. So one of the things we've been doing with coaches, Tom's been using coaches to train people, which you could do. You could take 100 managers at a time and have a coach train them in the basics of what are the fundamentals of running an effective team and how to use the digital support. You don't need a lot of upfront input. You don't need a week's course. You could do that in half a day. But the real support then needs to be as they get to the limits of what they can do using the technology, how are they brought back into groups of 7 or 8 peer managers across the organization from different parts of it? So we're building cross-learning with a team coach to look at what are now some of the new challenges that are emerging out of this that they now have to deal with, because the digital stuff will get them so far, but then it will open up stuff that was previously buried. It will show up what was not being addressed. And that's where the manager, the leader, need somebody with greater experience across many teams who can see patterns supporting them. So then the coach moves from coaching the individual to coach the team to coaching the team leaders to coach their team, or supervising the managers and leaders on how they coach their team. And then the other really exciting bit of that is that the technology that Tom's been developing with his team, that creates a dashboard of what activity is going on right across the enterprise, right? What issues are being looked at, what sort of activity is happening, who's using what, while maintaining team confidentiality, while maintaining that what's going on with the team stays within their own canvas. But we can start to look at the patterns across the enterprise. Now, what we're trying to build alongside that is experienced team coaches who also understand organizational culture, who can look at how the organizational cultural patterns are being enacted in and through teams. Because team dynamics is not just created by the team members, right? Teams enact what they're carrying for the wider system. That makes sense. And to be able to do so, we've done this elsewhere in coaching. You know, I ran a session for one stage for 80 internal and external coaches right across the civil service in the UK, whereby we got all the coaches together and we looked at what were the patterns that were coming up in individual coaching and team coaching, and how could we use that to build a cultural analysis, which could then open up a dialogue with the senior leaders of the organization, which said, look, this is what you're trying to achieve as an organization, this is your strategy, this is your future challenges, this is where the culture will enable that, and this is where the culture as it's currently being enacted is going to get in the way of you achieving your strategy. And therefore, what does that mean? We need to change about the coaching. What do we need to change around HR? What do we need to change around cultural change from the top? And what do we need to enable differently in alignment across? And that's where I think there's enormous potential, because 2012, I wrote a little book called Creating a Coaching Culture. And in that, I said, look, companies are investing enormous amounts of money in coaching, but very few can answer the question, how does the organization learn from those thousands of coaching conversations? You can send everyone off to a coaching platform to find a coach and have lots of personal development, but no organizational learning and change. And I think that's where Tom and I are both motivated by how do we get that join up between individual change, team of team change, organizational change, and organizations partnering with all their stakeholders change.
Wow, while you were talking, I was imagining first an octopus with many legs because you're covering so much, but then it sounds more like a tree, as in building the roots so that then the organization can really grow in a way in which is sustainable. You, of course, are getting a lot of data from working with these teams. And so you spoke about patterns. And so thinking a bit more about those patterns that you've seen, what are you finding that are the easiest behaviors or the more challenging behaviors to shift?
I'll pick up in terms of, from a digital perspective, what we see is that anything that is you can prompt an individual to do without needing to collaborate with a team is easier. So one-to-one activity, because you can just kind of organize that yourself. And actually feedback is something we can prompt because you can just receive feedback, but encouraging this culture of giving and requesting feedback. So I would say those are the ones where we see sort of highest initial utilization. The group activity always needs more encouragement and support and I think this reflects the fact that many managers aren't used to doing it, which is one of the things we're trying to address is build that capability. So by giving them really simple tools to do it, we see good adoption. I'll give you an example of a pattern we've seen, which was very powerful within an organization. They were implementing, different habits and routines. One of them was around this regular reflection, regular retrospective. They adopted a kind of idea of a retrospective meeting for teams. This was new to the organization. They hadn't been doing it before. Through using regular retrospectives for a 6-month period, we saw significant increases in levels of psychological safety within the team. So it went over 40%. Because people, the first time they did a retrospective, it was a bit unusual and it took them quite a long time. But once they were doing it every few weeks and they'd created a pattern of it, it became just very normal to bring up issues. So just simply prompting people to have that conversation with some quite simple questions had a significant impact in terms of psychological safety. But then speaking to Peter's point, as we were bringing managers together who were doing these retrospectives, we had a kind of coach facilitated some of these peer group sessions. We were starting to see patterns across these organizations as well, these teams as well. So I think there's, it is interesting, and I would say that the biggest step for most teams is to feel confident to open up the team conversations that haven't been happening before. And that's where a lot of it is around giving the manager the confidence to frame a conversation around purpose. Because a lot of managers, that's quite scary to open up a conversation about what is the purpose of our team. And this is where the skill of people like Peter, in terms of, in fact, we were just having a session the other day where I was picking his brains about how do we get a leader of a team to have a conversation about purpose that doesn't feel cheesy or awkward. So there's a lot of skill in the design of the prompts, but also there's a lot of skill where we can augment that with kind of coaches supporting those conversations as well.
And if I just build off that last one, Tom, a very common pattern is that when you get a team to look at its collective purpose, their first default position is, what are our bosses targeting us to do? So they do it from this is what we're being told, not an empowered position. And to realize that the teams, we used to talk about the commission, it is co-missioned. It's what is it? You see, the bosses are often carrying the needs of the investors or the needs of the customer. But there are many needs. There's the employee needs, the customer needs, the supplier needs, community needs, the ecology needs. And the team have to look at, actually their purpose is not something they create. People get into this, either I'm in charge of it and I can create our own team purpose, or we're just being told. That is such a common human stuckness. Rather than, actually, we have to discover our purpose. To do that, we have to be in dialogue with all our stakeholders in all directions. We can't create it, and we're not the victim of it. And that's where, you see, I think team coaching, some of the human element, to be able to help a team have a conversation with, like an exec team to have a conversation with a board, is a very skilled operation, which you cannot do just with a digital app. Yeah. To get that reconnection across that boundary, to be able to get to deal with bringing a number of teams. I worked with a hospital where I've worked with several very large hospitals where all the different clinical divisions would have all sorts of stuff that has to go across clinical divisions. So they would go up to the exec team and back down again. And actually where they needed their help is to realize, once they were all working on their own team dynamics, that actually we had to shift that pattern, because the exec team needs to be working on the future strategy. They need to be working on the outside stakeholder connections. They need to be working in partnership with all sorts of other hospitals and suppliers. And they had to be managing that external stakeholder partnership. That meant that the integration of the company should not be happening in the top team. And this is true of most organizations, right? The integration should be happening across the middle, right? So that's where by getting all the teams to work themselves, you start to bring out what are some of the organizational patterns that need shifting, that you then have to orchestrate a conversation across teams. So we've done sessions whereby teams, having worked on their purpose, worked on clarified their team charter, worked on their own behaviors, have then come and presented it to a team of teams meeting, got feedback from every other team in the hospital or the big financial organization. And then we've facilitated every team saying, look, this is what we need from every other team, and this is what we can offer the other teams. So now we're coaching the connections, not just the individual. But we can't do that if we had to coach every team in the hospital before we could get there. You would not have the either the financial or the people resources to do that. That's whereby all the work, basic work, we need to be able to do through the manager, digitally enabled. Then we can see the patterns through things like the dashboard and the cultural theme analysis. Then we can actually start to go in and make the interventions where they will have the biggest impact. And that means this is a revolution for coaches. They've got to rethink their role, if you like, in enabling the organizations of the future.
Fascinating. So going a bit deeper into the role of the coaches, can you explain more to the listeners what you see that role being in the next 2 years?
I kind of operate on a principle, which is, I shouldn't be doing anything that I can get coaches to do, and they should be doing anything that they can get internal coaches to do, and they should be doing anything they can get the managers to do. The managers shouldn't be doing anything they can get their teams to do. The digital support has a role at all of those hand clasping as we move work to the lowest level it can be done at. So, we've talked about distributive leadership for a long time, but distributive coaching, right?
Yeah.
Don't do more than what you can uniquely do. And it's the same with leaders. One of the hardest thing with leaders with teams is they talk about, over and over again, I'm trying to empower my team, but the team won't step up because they are trying to empower the team and manage the empowerment. What leaders find it really difficult to do is to say, look, we've got these really big challenges and I need the help from everyone in the team to address them. I cannot do this by myself. I cannot manage you doing them. Together, we've got to work out how we're doing it. And we need coaches to move to that way of thinking. I'm not here to coach you. You and I, even in individual coaching, we're here to discover what your world is needing you to step up to, that you don't know how to step up to. I don't know how you're going to step up to it, but together we can discover. And that's why I think we're seeing an underlying radical revolution in all forms of coaching, not just digitally driven, but driven because of the fact that the challenges in the world are getting bigger and bigger. And we've done a lot in coaching around helping people develop their IQ, develop their EQ. But the real challenge now is the WeQ, the collaborative intelligence. And individual coaching is very constrained on how much it can do with collaborative intelligence. That's where, and even team coaching, because team coaches can't reach that number of teams. If you're working intensively with leadership teams, most team coaches can't coach more than 2 or 3 at a time. So, you just think of the number of leadership teams in the world and how many systemic team coaches we would need. That's why we can only really create and address the real issues about organizational transformation and the fact that increasingly the world operates through partnerships, not just organizations, partnerships across organizations. That's where the new challenges lie.
The concept of collaboration. There's one thing you spoke in the start, at the beginning, which is the social connections within teams.
Yeah. What one has kind of discovered is that as this move to hybrid and virtual teams is so much what happened informally at the coffee breaks and around the edges, and that all personal connection. And now you need, if you only meet digitally, right, like we did at the beginning of today, there's a need to get that personal connection. And we were joking before we came on. I said, I have to work with teams to try and get them to adjust their cameras because I spend so much time on virtual meetings with teams where what I see is this. I see a lot of their ceiling and just their head. And we just get talking heads. And what we know from nonverbal communication is that we need to see people from the waist up. We need to see their hands. We need to see their bodies. And that makes a difference. We've also discovered that how you do your personal check-in at the beginning, what's been the highlight of your week or what's been your personal challenge and people bringing their pets in and their children coming. All of that helps build that, what you talked about earlier, that psychological safety, because we're then not just talking heads trying to solve problems. We are human beings, not just human doings. We're human beings with heart connection, facing some really big challenges that we need each other to collaborate on.
Yeah, I think it's really important these days to think very carefully about how we use meeting times. And one of the things we do see with a lot of teams is that meetings are not particularly useful. They're not really having the desired impact. And Peter set a lovely challenge, which I adore, which is, how can we halve the time we spend in meetings and double the impact we have? And one of the things we found from the research looking at meetings is, there are kind of primary reasons why you meet, which, is making a decision, sharing information with people, discussing new ideas and brainstorming ideas. And I think if teams are much clearer about why they're meeting, but I would add a new element, and we often do this with the clients we're working with, add a new element to the meeting, which is we just want to connect and meet each other. And actually what we found is sometimes organizations were having meetings sort of under the disguise of doing something, where actually what they wanted to do was just talk to people. And that should be fine. Put in some space to just catch up. So at the start of our week, we just have a meeting where we just catch up and discuss what happened at the weekend. And it's a lovely way to start the week, but it's much better because we haven't tried to confuse it with a whole load of other agenda items. We're just meeting to connect. So I think there's a lot we can do to find these spaces to be human beings and human doings if we're much more conscious about how we use the time we spend in meetings.
It is that notion that the team is not just a task team. It's an emotional container. It's a place of belonging. It's a source of motivation and energy. It's a source of learning. And one last thing I would just add is that I really encourage teams to cut down reporting time in live meetings. A lot of that can be done in other digital forms. Cut out all the stuff that can be done one-to-one, right? Because you have lots of meetings where it's just hub and spoke, each person going through the team leader and then the next person with the rest as audience. Cut out all of that. And at least every meeting focus on one thing that requires everyone's creativity and brains to be involved with. And use some technology to help you come up with a better answer through generative dialogue better than any individual could come up with, and better than the sum of individuals could come up with. An answer that was in nobody's head before they arrived at the meeting. And hopefully, Tom, we've done that today.
Indeed. There's a lovely quote from an academic called Mary Parker Follett, which I came across recently, who's looked a lot at why we have meetings. And she has this lovely maxim, which is to say, when you come to a meeting, expect to be needed, expect to need others, and expect to be changed. And I think that is a lovely way to think about how you come to a meeting.
Will you send me that reference, Tom? It's a lovely one.
I will.
Thank you so much for having us. As a routine, we usually ask members of the podcast to share with us one thing they have around them and how it relates to them. If you could do that, that would be great.
As we're short of time, I'll quickly say that from the first week that COVID hit China to now, I've always said I would have flowers behind me, because I think it's important that we have the more than human world in every coaching room and every training room, not just talking heads or talking humans.
I have a donkey here, which is because we have my wife and I have an aspiration one day. She's from Brazil, but a lot of her family is in Portugal, to go to a nice place in Portugal with a lot of countryside and have a donkey. This is going to help me get there.
Amazing. Tom, if you could please point the listeners to where they can find out more about all of this, that would be great.
A lot of the information that Peter was talking about is available on his website to download for free. That's renewalassociates.co.uk. And I thoroughly recommend his books on leadership team coaching, which have guided us faithfully as we've been trying to navigate this complex but fascinating area. For our platform, you can go to saberr.com, saberr.com. There's a resources page with a lot of information. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and get in touch. By all means, get in touch with me through LinkedIn if you'd like to. The name's Tom Marsden at Saberr.
Thank you so much both for joining us and for giving us your insights on how teams are working and how we can help teams in an organization.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Claudia. Go well.
So thank you for listening to another episode by the Association for Coaching. I have been Claudia Day. Our purpose is to help coaches in the process of navigating the new technologies that are arising in this field. If you would like to find out more, please follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest episodes and conversations, as well as our digital learning calendar.